Hey guys, today we're going to be doing a little bit of an exercise that I came up with to play around with color palettes and experiment a little bit with color in your illustrations by coloring in coloring books. So you might recognize the brand Colorit. They were kind enough to send me this coloring book as well as those markers and watercolor paper that you might have seen in another video. I will link that up above here. They have a super wide range of adult coloring books as well as some coloring supplies. For this video, I would love to spend the majority of my time talking about developing color palettes, but I did want to spend a little time here in the beginning to talk a little bit about the quality of these coloring books before I jump right into it. If you like what you see in this video and you are interested in purchasing this book or other Colorit coloring books, make sure to check out the links down below. And if you are interested in this coloring book in particular, hold out till the end of the video and I'll have a little bit of a special announcement for you guys. So as you might have seen, all of the pages in these books are perforated at the top, and this first page is meant as a sort of blotter page for you to be able to tear out and put behind pages to help with ink bleed through. I believe most, if not all, of their coloring books are actually spiral bound at the top, so they lay down super flat, and it's easy for artists who are both right and left-handed to use. They advertise these books to be great for use with colored pencils, fine liners, art markers, and gel pens specifically. And when I reached out about using watercolor or water medium, I was told that the watercolor brush pens that they have available would work well enough as long as you don't oversaturate the page, but typical watercolors and things like that that use a lot more water just aren't right for the paper that is provided in these books. Here are a few extra details about this coloring book, and any other information will be linked down below, so check this out on their website. Now onward into my little experimental color palette exercise. As you can see here, I had already started this page, and the idea here is looking up different color palettes and experimenting with them in a coloring book. So obviously you can do a full page for a particular color palette, but I tend to be quite impatient with that sort of thing and want to just jump right into experimenting with the colors and then try something new and then try something new again. What I ended up doing was picking a composition in this coloring book that I thought was fairly even in terms of detail along the entire piece, and I just marked off different sections for each of these color palettes to be contained within. So let's quickly chat about how to pick out color palettes. There's obviously a lot of different resources out there, but some of my favorites are just sort of scrolling through either Pinterest or my own Instagram feed of different artists that I really admire and looking at artwork and photography that is really inspirational. There are even a few different color palette planning sites. I'll have a couple of those listed down below if you're interested in those. But for this activity, what I ended up doing was showing you how I basically use Pinterest to find different color palettes. And these ones are mostly from designseeds.com, and they take some sort of inspirational image and break down the colors, typically about 5 or so colors. What I end up doing is I save some of my favorites. I also do have quite a few illustrations from artists that I am particularly inspired by their color palettes, and I decided to pick a couple of these and more or less match those colors with the color pencils that I have from Arteza. Now, I'm not going to be able to match these colors perfectly since I am limited to the amount of colors I have, but this does give me quite a wide range, and I did end up picking a few colors that were just slightly off in one or another direction, just so I had a little bit more to experiment with and have something that was a little bit different. So why did I choose to do this with a coloring book when I could obviously experiment in a sketchbook or use my own line work and an illustration or something like that? I wanted to do this activity because I feel like I put so much pressure on myself to get my own line work to a certain standard, and I get a little afraid of putting down color and to experiment, even in a sketchbook sometimes. And so taking that fear out of quote unquote ruining your line work or spending all this time on line work that is just for an experiment made this feel a lot more accessible for me to just break out my colors and start playing around with it. Another reason why I used colored pencils for this is I wanted to be able to just grab colors pretty quickly, not have to worry too much about mixing colors, and since I don't use colored pencils super regularly, this was a really easy thing for me to just sort of break out and not fear that I was going to run out of product as quickly, and be able to just experiment with a different medium too, which was nice. I also really liked only doing a little strip at a time of this illustration because I feel like I got a sense of how different the same image can look without having to copy and paste or color the same exact thing over and over. That's actually something that I got really frustrated with in college when I was in my illustration classes and art classes in general. It's a good rule of thumb to make lots and lots of thumbnails and experiment with colors and draw the same thing over and over, slightly different or exactly the same, to be able to experiment with it. Taking all of that work out of this was really nice to be able to just jump in, have something already lined for me to just focus on the color. I don't have a particular attachment to this illustration, so I can really focus on how the colors are interacting, how they're laying down. You can obviously use different mediums for this. I just wanted to break out my Arteza colored pencils because I haven't really been able to play with them too much, and I do want to start using them on other illustrations, and this was a really good way for me to practice with that. That being said, I do think that this coloring book is super adorable. I do really love the difference and variety of compositions you get in this. For it being all about unicorns, you would sort of expect it to all look exactly the same, and while there is definitely a similar style among all of the illustrations, they're not all completely random. There is a variety of different kinds of textures and line weights and line work that you can play around with throughout this entire book. Now, that being said, I figured I would give just a little bit of my thoughts on using this coloring book here at the end and let you know what my thoughts are with using this as a tool and just in general playing around in this coloring book. So I'm not someone who uses coloring books a whole heck of a lot. I end up enjoying coloring my own lines a lot more, but this activity actually helped reignite my love for coloring books just a little bit more, and taking the focus off of coloring it correctly because I knew it was going to have these strips of kind of random colors. That being said, I feel like while they advertise colored pencils being great for these coloring books, at least this one with this sort of smoother paper, it didn't have enough tooth or texture of the paper for me to feel like I could really layer a whole lot. I felt like it was a little too smooth for tons of layering. Now, for what I'm doing here, there wasn't a whole lot of layering I was doing, so it ended up working out. But if colored pencil is something that you really gravitate toward, these coloring books might not be the best for you. I feel like these are made just a little bit more for something like markers or inks and things like that, as long as, again, you're not oversaturating the paper. So that's why I did want to show you another little clip here of me testing out both the brush pens that I showed you in my other video that were sent by Colorit, as well as some alcohol markers using the blotter page behind the paper. Obviously, I didn't use this page when I was doing colored pencil because there was no fear of bleed through, but I did want to get the chance to use this special edition that they do add in these books for you to have, especially since it's in the book, it's ready to go. It's just kind of a nice little extra that they do include. I also did want to test out just regular alcohol markers, so for this page I'm just going to pick a couple little spots and test out both these mediums to show you my results. I would say I used about a normal amount of ink I would use in a typical alcohol marker piece. So here are what they look like as far as bleed through, and it didn't go completely through to the blotter page, but I do like that there is one included because if I layered any more, I would probably have quite a bit of bleed through. And in terms of just coloring and bleeding on the actual front of the page, past the line work, I actually was pretty impressed with how well the colors didn't just completely bleed out of the lines, and they seem to blend pretty well. Since my plan for this video was more focused on using the colored pencils, I didn't want to spend a whole heck of a lot on the alcohol markers, but I did want to test this out just to show you guys what my results are, and I may end up using more of my cheaper alcohol markers to do very similar color palette testing in the future. So overall, I think that these coloring books are really great for alcohol markers if that is your thing and you're super into coloring books. I think just about any of the coloring books from Colorit would be really fantastic for you to use. And I did mention I wanted to try out their watercolor brushes, which are a newer product as well. And these were sent to me little ways back along with watercolor paper, and to be honest, I actually was really hoping that they would send a coloring book because I wanted to test the quality of the paper and test these kinds of watercolor brush pens on something like a coloring book. So I was excited to test these out in this coloring book, and I was actually really happy with how well it worked. I think because of how watercolor brush pens are and how easily you can just kind of layer them, it didn't really matter that I didn't have watercolor paper. This smoother paper actually worked pretty well because I think it just, you get a fairly even flow of color and you don't have to rely too much on traditional watercolors that really need that binding in the paper and other elements for the color to spread and create a more even layer. This, you have a pretty even flow of color out of the pens, and so it's just a matter of layering them, and it works very similar to an alcohol marker. It's just a little bit different, and of course you can add water if you really want to spread things out, and I feel like they blend pretty nicely and pretty similarly to alcohol markers. And I think one of the things I maybe prefer slightly more with using a watercolor brush pen on something like this instead of an alcohol marker is I feel like the flow of ink is steady and not too much, whereas I feel like with alcohol markers sometimes you get a little too much ink, which can cause bleeding. Like I mentioned, it wasn't too bad in this book, but you get kind of a heavier saturation, and these I felt like you could layer them a little bit easier and not have to add as much ink to get them to blend as you would with an alcohol marker. So just a little bit of a difference in preference, I think, but I think these worked really fantastic on this coloring book and this little bird that I decided to paint with their watercolor brush pens. Okay, so on to the giveaway. On top of Colorit's generosity with sending me these supplies to test out for you guys, they are also giving away 2 free coloring books of this brand new unicorn coloring book. I do want to mention that this is unfortunately not open internationally, but if you international viewers can hold on for just a little bit, I am going to be doing another giveaway to celebrate us reaching 5,000 subscribers because that just recently happened, so hold tight for that. But for everyone else who is eligible for winning these Colorit coloring books, 2 winners will be picked, and all you have to do to enter is be a subscriber and comment down below and tell me what your favorite mythical creature is. It Does it happen to be unicorns? This would be the perfect thing for you to win. But maybe it's something else. I'm really curious what your favorite mythical creatures are, and I would love to maybe experiment with more kinds of mythical creatures like these in illustrations in the future. So that is it for me today. I hope you enjoyed this sort of color planning idea, concept, technique that I wanted to share with you guys that I find pretty helpful. And for any of you that are in the market for a new coloring book, maybe this is the right one for you, or maybe some of the other designs that Colorit has. I did want to shout out one more thank you to Colorit for sending me these products to try out, and in general being just pretty awesome to work with. They have been really fantastic through email and communication, and thank you so much for just being some fantastic folks making some really cool products. All right, that's it for me today. I hope you have a creatively fulfilled day, and I will see you next time. Bye, guys.